There's this moment where a jumping spider watches prey from a distance, loses sight of it completely, then successfully approaches from behind, suggesting it held a mental map and planned a route while the target was invisible. Another spider loses sight of prey and gives up, no planning ability. One spider's poppy seed-sized brain is maintaining spatial memory and executing forward planning. The other's isn't. One demonstrates cognition that looks like mammalian problem-solving. The other operates purely on stimulus response. How is a brain with so few neurons capable of behaviors we associate with much larger, more complex brains? Let's start with the fundamental constraint. Spider brains are absurdly small. A jumping spider's entire central nervous system fits in a space smaller than a grain of rice. For comparison, a human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons. A jumping spider has maybe a few 100,000. That's not a small difference. It's orders of magnitude smaller. And yet, with that tiny neural budget, some spiders demonstrate behaviors that look like planning, learning, problem-solving, even counting. How is that possible? The answer seems to be extreme neural efficiency. When you have limited processing power, you can't afford redundancy. Every neuron has to earn its place. Every connection has to serve a critical function. Think of it like the difference between a massive data center and a highly optimized smartphone chip. The data center has raw power, but it's inefficient. The smartphone chip has to do a lot with very little, so every element is engineered for maximum efficiency. Spider brains work like that chip. Stripped down, specialized, incredibly effective at specific tasks. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all spiders show the same level of cognitive sophistication. Some species, like the jumping spiders in the genus Portia, demonstrate behaviors that look genuinely intelligent. Planning detours, solving novel problems, learning from trial and error. Other spiders, even closely related ones, don't. They follow rigid behavioral scripts. Stimulus triggers response. No flexibility, no adaptation. Why the difference? One hypothesis: ecological pressure. Portia spiders hunt other spiders, prey with excellent vision and fast reflexes. If you're hunting something that can see you coming and that's potentially dangerous, you need to be tricky. You need to assess the situation, plan your approach, adapt when your first strategy fails. Over evolutionary time, spiders in this ecological niche developed more sophisticated neural architecture because the ones that couldn't plan didn't survive. The cognitive ability wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. Other spiders hunt prey that's less visually acute or less dangerous. They can get by with simpler strategies. Build a web, wait, grab whatever gets stuck. That doesn't require planning or spatial memory. It just requires following an innate program. So their brains stayed simpler because there was no evolutionary advantage to complexity. This suggests that cognition isn't a ladder where more is always better. It's a toolkit where you only develop the tools you need. Now let's talk about how these tiny brains manage complex behaviors. One mechanism seems to be neural reuse, the same neurons serving multiple functions depending on context. In larger brains, you can afford specialization. One region handles vision, another handles memory, another handles motor control. In a spider brain, you can't afford that level of separation. Instead, the same neural circuits might be involved in multiple tasks. The neurons processing visual information about prey might also be involved in planning movement toward that prey. This kind of multitasking requires sophisticated coordination, but it dramatically reduces the number of neurons needed. There's also evidence that spiders use external scaffolding. They offload cognitive work onto their environment. Web-building spiders, for example, don't need to remember the exact structure of their web, because the web itself holds that information. They can feel where the strands are, detect where there's damage, and repair it without maintaining a full mental model. The environment becomes part of the cognitive system. This is called extended cognition, and it's a way to do smart things without needing a big brain. But some spider behaviors can't be explained by environmental scaffolding or simple programming. There's evidence that some jumping spiders can learn from experience, reverse learned associations when conditions change, and even demonstrate what looks like curiosity, exploring novel objects without any immediate reward. These behaviors suggest something more than reflex. They suggest genuine flexibility, and maybe even something like decision-making. One particularly striking experiment involved jumping spiders navigating a water maze, something they naturally avoid. Researchers found that some individuals consistently chose safer routes over riskier ones, even when the first move for all routes looked identical. This suggests they were evaluating multiple options before committing to action. That's planning. That's forward modeling. And it's happening in a brain smaller than the head of a pin. So here's what this tells us about intelligence. We tend to think of cognition as something that requires big brains, lots of neurons, complex architecture. But spider research suggests that's not the only path. You can have sophisticated behavior with minimal neural hardware, if that hardware is exquisitely tuned to the problems you need to solve. Intelligence isn't about raw processing power. It's about efficiency, specialization, and using whatever resources you have in the smartest possible way. And maybe that's the real takeaway. When you look at a jumping spider tracking prey, you're not looking at a mindless automaton. You're looking at a creature that's solving problems in real time, with a brain that fits on the tip of your finger. It's a reminder that complexity doesn't always require size, and that intelligence can emerge from systems far smaller and simpler than we ever imagined. So next time you see a spider, maybe pause before you panic, because that tiny creature might be doing something cognitively impressive that we're only just beginning to understand.